Good evening, everybody, and sorry if I cannot speak Spanish. I really would like to, but from next week I will do a very intensive course, so maybe in December I can do this conference in Spanish, or I hope also in a good way. So sorry for that. Usually I don't like to speak in another language compared to the place I am, but this is the only thing I can do today. Thank you for the invitation, and thank you also for the introduction. Is it my English okay? Yeah. Okay, that's perfect. If you just need to interrupt me or whatever, just do it, no problem. And I would like also to explain a little bit about the research project I'm running now, since 1 year now. As Antonio said, it's a Marie Curie fellowship. I think this is interesting for you. Maybe in your future you would like to do research. It's funding that the European Union is giving to excellent researchers. But you know, excellence in Europe, in the European standards, can be everything. I'm not a genius, so anyone can apply for that funding and get funded for that. And this project is a 3-year fellowship that lets you go in different countries, so outside Europe or in Europe, in order to do research on the topics you would like to inquire and know better. And it's a very nice occasion to go on. So maybe in your future, after your career, after you complete your university or your career, you can apply for that. So just check the website of the European Union. And this is something I like to say to the people that are listening to me always, because we know we are living in a precarious condition. I'm a precarious researcher, even though I won this fellowship in Italy. So I think it's interesting to know that you can do research even though the university has not yet the funding to make you work in here. So this is a kind of message I would like to say to you. And the project is about urban regeneration and social innovation. So these are two very strong buzzwords. So I'm sure you know about them, but I will go through them from a theoretical point of view, but also from a practical point of view. But I think what is most important today is this concept of hyperdiversity. So as Antonio said about my book, some years ago, I was working more on migration studies. So I was working understanding how migration relates to the urban space, and particularly to public spaces. So I was working on conflicts among migrant communities and people that are living in a country in specific neighborhoods in Italy and the Netherlands. But while I was going on with my research, I realized that the concept of hyperdiversity was very famous in the literature in Europe, but also in Canada and in the US. And with hyperdiversity, usually you refer to something that is a little bit different to interculturalism or multiculturalism, that is considering that nowadays, if we think about diversity, we should not think only about migration, but also about how people live in the city with very, very different attitudes. So there's a kind of hyper diversity in cities, in neighborhoods. So migration is not only the thing that is making the society more complex today. Think about our kind of migration, so high-skilled migrants that are moving. Think about tourism and the touristification of places, and you know that because you're living in Barcelona. Think about how people live the cities also according to their preferences, their cultural preferences. So think about also how people live in a city just to have fun and go all around the neighborhoods. And this is something that makes neighborhoods even more complex. So if we're thinking about cities today, obviously migration and diversity is one of the most important issues because it's growing everywhere. But at the same time, migration is overlapping with other kinds of diversity. And this concept of hyperdiversity, it's important in order to make us think about this. So usually migration studies was a little bit stuck in a cultural point of view, so understanding communities and migrant communities as something that was, something that was stuck and not changing over time, and at the same time, usually was not thinking that migrants and migrant neighborhood also are together with other kind of complexities. Think about Raval in here. I don't know anything about Raval. I just arrived on Monday, but you know that. So think about that kind of neighborhood. If you think about migration, it's there. But if you think about other kind of populations that are complexifying that neighborhood, I'm sure you can understand what I mean with hyperdiversity. Is it clear? Okay. So given this concept, this is, let's say, the focus of my research is today working on that kind of neighborhood. So in Toronto, I'm working in a neighborhood that I will present today that is called Parkdale, and I will present it. And here in Barcelona, I would like to work on Raval, but I'm not sure yet. I'm trying to understand if it's the right neighborhood to do my research. And so neighborhoods that have, again, a very high, let's say, question around migration, but at the same time with other kind of difference and different layers in the neighborhoods. So today, my presentation will be 1 hour, and I will try to be a little bit organized in order to not make you sleep on Friday night. So 3 chapters. The first one is a little bit an overview about how the economic crisis in Europe has changed the urban regeneration practices and also policies all around Europe. The second chapter is about the concept of social innovation, specifically in urban regeneration practices. And the third one is a kind of list of experiences, so case studies, some in Italy and one in Toronto, Canada. Do you agree with this? You cannot say no, so that's good. No, I'm joking. Just stop me whenever you want and do questions. And if you don't understand something, just, do it. Do this. Okay, chapter 1. I'm sure you know that. If we think about Europe today, and if we think about the concept of hyperdiversity that I told you before, we have to understand that we are in a context of crisis, and even though people are saying that the crisis in Italy is stopped, this is something that is not true, and that are not saying that. But at the same time, you know that if an economical crisis is coming, the effect of it is very, very long-term based. So we cannot say that today Europe is, something that is outside the economical crisis. And the effect of the economical crisis was very, very strong, particularly because if you see this map, the question of poverty in Europe has grown in the last years. And if you think, and if you see the statistic of Eurostat of 2018, the European Union is saying that poverty was growing. And if you compare the data from between 2008 and 2016, in 2016, the poverty rate was higher than in 2008. So it's growing, and it's growing differently according to different regions in Europe. So see here Italy and Spain, how they are, and see how this different European Union is going. So this is just a picture to say that poverty is something that we have to deal with in Europe. And this is the change in median income between 2011 and 2012. Just a very short timing, but just in order to see how many countries were decreasing. So we're getting more, let's say, we're getting poorer. And Italy and Spain, obviously, are on the left part. And some data about poverty, I will not read them, and I can give you the presentation so you can read the data at home. But just in order to say that the unemployment of the young population, and I think you understand what I'm saying, is something that is growing and growing each and every year. And this is something that is complexifying migration flows nowadays in a very peculiar way. Just in order to talk about that, think about Italy. Migration was a movement that was making people come to Italy for many, many years. But now, migrants that have citizenship, the Italian citizenship, usually tend to migrate outside Italy once they have the Italian citizenship. So this is something, and particularly the youngest, so this is something that is changing also migration movement all around Europe of low-skilled migrants, but also of high-skilled migrants. And I think you can understand that. My students in Venice, let's say the majority of them, when I teach them, they say, when I will finish the university, I will migrate. Obviously, just, it's something for, we are talking about that. It's not, I don't have any data now on that. But the perception is that people, and particularly the youngest one, tend to migrate outside countries that are in a situation of poverty compared to that map that I was showing you. At the same time, poverty is particularly affecting the lower segments of the society. So migrants, but also families that are composed by just one person. And at the same time, population that usually are migrant in, by definition, like Roma people. So if you see data, and you can find on the website of the European Union many reports on that, about poverty in Europe today, you can see that poverty is affecting particularly some segments of the society, not all of them, obviously, and this is something that is changing how cities are today and also how migration flows are organized. And another topic that is very relevant today is that poverty is concentrating within some cities, but particularly within some neighborhoods in cities. And this process is called spatial segregation, as you know. I'm sure you know that. But at the same time, social spatial polarization. That is a different kind of concept, and it's more specific. And the meaning of that is that usually if you see a city, the people that are belonging to the lower class and to the upper class and the lower class of the society usually are growing in distance. And there's a kind of erosion of the middle class neighborhoods. And this is very specific about Toronto, as an example, and I will show you some data. So cities today are, let's say, the majority of them have together these two processes. So concentration of poverty in some specific neighborhood, but at the same time, an increasing gap between the richer part of the society and the poorest one. In this condition, that is not very happy, we have in parallel what we can call shrinking of the regional and local budgets. You can find data again on Eurostat and on the website of the European Union. If you see the regional and local public expenditure until 2007 was growing, then the crisis came, and the policies of austerity, also led by the European Union, has made local societies and local governments obliged to cut their expenses. And this happened everywhere in Europe, but particularly in some countries, and in that countries that you see in the map that usually are the most poorer. So in a condition of poverty and in a condition where the society is changing so fast, local governments are shrinking their capacity to act locally, and the budgets are constraining every day. So in this condition, in this kind of context, the traditional models of urban regeneration cannot be continued. And when I say urban regeneration, I refer specifically to very big and state-led projects, rehabilitation programs, regeneration programs, top-down interventions led by the state. So that kind of, policies that are state-driven and paid with public money were changing because of that condition. Local governments had not the opportunity to spend and invest on the urban environment as they could do before. So there was a shift and a rapid change also on the concept of urban regeneration. And this is the reason why the concept of social innovation was applied to that concept. Since 2008, you can find that many documents or policy initiatives or projects are referring to innovative practices of urban regeneration. This innovative is a kind of label. And usually, this label refers to two main features. First of all, new approaches to urban regeneration that are more linked to community-based initiatives. So, since 2008, we were referring to urban regeneration more to practices that were driven by the communities in each and every neighborhoods in cities. Before, it was very difficult to call them urban regeneration processes. But from 2008, and according to the situation I told you before, this was something that was there, because very big projects was not there anymore, and in the communities, people were left behind and left alone, and they were trying to activate themselves. And this kind of condition was related to urban activation and urban regeneration. At the same time, in Europe, we had a renewed interest in dealing with vacant and underused properties, because it's obvious that the crisis left behind many empty buildings, both private and public. And this is a map that is showing the number of empty properties that you had in different countries. And you can download it from The Guardian. And so these two main features was there together. So urban regeneration was related more to projects related to underused public and private buildings. And at the same time, the role of communities was there stronger compared to the past. So this, I'm just, it's a little bit general, but it's to give you an overview and an introduction about what happened and how urban regeneration practice has changed during the time. As a consequence, the role of local authorities changed a lot in this condition, in this, macro situation. And first of all, local authorities started to think in a different way their role. First of all, becoming more open to ideas that before was not there. So if in 2000 or in the 90s, you were going to a local authority, to a mayor, and you were saying, I would like to do an urban regeneration project about vacant buildings in your city, probably the mayor was not so excited as it was in 2008. So this kind of condition, the crisis, but also the shrinking of local budgets, made local authorities think differently about urban projects and urban interventions. And at the same time, they started more to think about different kind of partnership, not only private-public partnerships, but also public-people partnerships. So thinking about the role of citizens and community-based organizations, NGOs, different kind of local stakeholders that could have a role and play a role in the urban dimension. And this is a slide I took from Ivan Tosics, that is a teacher in the master I'm coordinating in Italy, that is describing 3 different kinds of approaches that local authorities were using after the crisis. The budget airline model, like Ryanair, so a city that is providing the minimum service and then charging for the extras. So if you want the trolley, you pay. The second one is the city as a civic entrepreneur model. So cities like Milan that were considering, municipalities that were considering more outsourcing and sharing with other stakeholders the public dimension, the public, la finalità, the public purpose, aim, yeah, sorry, I was losing the word. And third, the cooperative model that I will present today in Naples and Bologna, where the city were having strong alliances with citizens in the neighborhoods. So these are, let's say, 3 kinds of different partnership that usually the local authorities were doing after the crisis and after the shrinking of their budgets. So this is the second chapter. It's more theoretical, but I think it's important in order to share with you the concept of social innovation, because it's a concept that can be described and used for everything. But I think it's very important to be a little bit specific, because if not, it's used as a buzzword for saying whatever. And here you find the relevant EU urban declarations that are talking about social innovation during the time. So starting from 1997 and going to 2020. So you can see that the social innovation concept is very, very long in timing. It's not new. It's not of today. And what happened is that if at the beginning we were talking about an urban agenda, so you can find more policy documents that are talking about social innovation as an instrument together with the public dimension of local action. The more you go on, in the European 2020 strategy, there's a kind of privatization of the social innovation concept. So I'm very critical of that, so I just say to you before so you can understand which is my position. But if you go on reading the documents from the European Union, social innovation was used also in order to justify the state that was not there anymore. So a kind of welfare state that was not there anymore. And this is very important to stress, because this is something that now probably also the European Union has recognized we should go a little bit behind. So if you read a report published last year, the European Union is saying that the social innovation concept is not having the impact that the European Union, wanted to have. So also the European Union today is a little bit critical of the process of privatizing the concept of social innovation, saying that social innovation has to be linked to the public authority and the local governments in order to be effective. So just read, if you want, all the documents, because I think it's really interesting to understand how this concept has changed from 1997 to 2020. And if we want to understand a little bit the concept of social innovation from a more theoretical point of view, here you have some references that you can download and find everywhere, starting from the laws, so a more theoretical and philosophical approach to the concept of social innovation, going through Osterling, Mullaert, Hillier. They are the maximum experts of social innovation, but at the same time, people that says, like Garcia, Algadel, and Pradel, that institutions matters, and we have to talk about local governments and innovation in local governments, institutional change, if we want to have a kind of social innovation that is effective. And then you have the publications, very recent one of Blanco and Nello that you know, that are critique about the concept of social innovation, describing how social innovation is not equally distributed in neighborhoods, but usually social innovative initiatives are more concentrated in high-class, middle-class neighborhoods with a strong tradition of local activation, and also with a social mix that is there. And I'm sure you know that, so I will not go on this. And before I told about a more theoretical and academic concept of social innovation, but this is the definition that the European Union is giving us. And as you see, the European Union is referring to the market. So social innovation is something that the European Union is linking more nowadays to a kind of efficiency, a market-driven efficiency, a little bit losing the social cohesion and the social inclusion concepts that were present before. So if you see the first declaration that I showed you, the concept was different. Nowadays, it has changed a lot. And so if we want to criticize a little bit the concept of social innovation and question it critically, and this is something we can debate after, so if you're interested in some critical questions about social innovation, is it a new label to describe old concepts? So community development, community organizing, cooperativism. maybe we're using something to describe something that was already there. Is it a hipster culture of activism? There's many scholars that are saying that now. Is there a risk to co-opt collective action, so control local activation and mobilization in neighborhoods? Is it a neoliberal framework in order to do more with less? So justifying the state that is going away from its own responsibility? And is it a concept that is taking us not to consider more structural dimensions like poverty that I showed you before? And what about the social innovation distribution in neighborhoods? As Oriol and Ismail are saying, their research is related to the metropolitan area of Barcelona, but you know, there's many other scholars that are saying very similar things in other countries, so should be interested to do a research understanding the distribution of social innovation, not only in Barcelona and in the metropolitan region, but also in other countries in order to understand where social innovation is located. Chapter 3, experiences. Are you tired? Are you sleeping? No. Am I boring? Okay. I'm trying to give you an overview of very different contexts and case studies. So I'm not trying to compare them because you cannot. I'm talking about Regione Puglia, so a regional policies about social innovation, Bologna, Naples, Toronto, and Milan, so cities that cannot be comparable. I'm trying to compare three neighborhoods that are comparable because they are very similar, but I cannot compare cities. So I'm not comparing Barcelona to Toronto and to Bologna, obviously, but I'm comparing three neighborhoods within the cities. Today, I'm just trying to make you an overview, a general overview of cities and different policies related to social innovation, particularly in hyperdiverse context. And the common ground that you can find in these policies is the importance of underused properties, as I told you before, the different kind of attitude of the public authorities, the local authorities, in using the social innovative actions. The different roles of funding mechanism. In Toronto, you find private foundations that are funding all the activities of the community-based organizations at local level. And so you can find also a very different role of the local authorities that can be more managerial in some cases or more active in others. So these are case studies that can give you the opportunity to understand the different ways that the local authorities, so the public authority, is dealing with social innovative initiatives and which kind of policies, usually and in different countries, according to different countries, these policies are shaped. So starting from the beautiful city of Bologna. Chi è italiano? Ah, perfetto. So, just to be a little bit interactive, do you know the policies of laboratori di quartiere in Bologna? A little bit? What do you think about that? Così. You have an opinion or?
Yes, I think they're trying to be more active, looking at the past. But I think, in my that they still have to work about not just the communication and the sensibilization, but the work with people and the collaboration with the citizens. So maybe the information is still
close.
closed, yes, and because I think it's very difficult. It's very different societies. In Catalan people have. I was speaking just about that question with a colleague a few minutes ago, and it's like that. So it's, you have different societies, so you have a different policy and a different way to
Yeah.
act
Attention. Okay. Thank you. So Bologna, it's an interesting case in Italy. I think one of the most interesting in Italy today. Was the first case, the first city to adopt the Regolamento dei Beni Comuni in Italy. This regulation is a kind of pact that the city does with citizens in order to take care about urban commons. Urban commons that can be a park, a street, a portico, whatever you want. And practically, the Regolamento dei Beni Comuni, it's a way that the citizens, or also a group of citizens or an association, can propose to the municipality to take care together of some places, urban commons, and they make a pact, and this pact says what the municipality should do and what the citizens should do in order to take care of that urban commons. Bologna was the first one. Many pacts were signed, and after Bologna, many other cities in Italy approved the same regulations with very different outcomes. 135 municipalities in Italy approved Regolamento dei Beni Comuni, and this was the starting point of 2014. So this is a scheme that is trying to make you understand that the policies about social innovation and urban regeneration in Bologna started in 2014, we can say, with the Regolamento dei Beni Comuni. Bologna at the same time approved another policy that was Rete Civica Iperbole, so was an online platform in order to make people and citizens participate, but online. In 2015, there was Riforma dei Quartieri, so neighborhood change and reform, that gave more power to the neighborhoods from a political but also technical point of view. And then in between 2015 and 2016, the municipality approved a policy that was called Collaborare a Bologna that resulted in two things that I think that are important. One is Piano di Innovazione Urbana, so the plan of urban innovation, that it's a kind of concept, it's a policy, and it's not very common to have that kind of very general and comprehensive policies in Italy that was saying which kind of direction Bologna wanted to take in using underused properties and underused buildings, using social innovation in order to make citizens participate in neighborhoods. In order to make Piano di Innovazione Urbana functions, there was another policy that was called Laboratori di Quartiere, neighborhood laboratory. There was the tool that the municipality used in order to make citizens participate in neighborhoods. And as your colleague was saying, this was the tool the municipality tried to use in very different neighborhoods, so diverse neighborhoods, but also very white neighborhoods and rich neighborhoods. They were trying to make different populations participate, and it was very, very difficult. So she was saying something that is very true, the capacity of the municipality to talk and reach different kind of communities, different kind of languages, different kind of interests about public life was very, very difficult. And so if we can say that even though the Bologna municipality is very clever and they are trying to make their best in doing that, during my research, I'm interviewing them and working with them, so they are very reflective on it, so they know, they are aware, and they are trying to function in a different way, but this was the most important challenge that they had. So how to make different hyper-diverse societies participate at the same level in the public life of a city. And the first tool they used in order to overcome this critical thing, was starting a little bit of research about fragilità demografica. You can understand it, no? In Italian. The demographic fragility. So they were making using the Istat data, making a kind of map, understanding which are the most fragile areas in Bologna. And you can find them in red. So this is Bologna, these are the neighborhoods, and you can find the red spots as the most fragile urban areas. And this kind of fragility is made by demographic, but also housing and urban indicators. So it's not only a demographic indicators, but it's also something related to how you live in a city, in which kind of house you live. And Bologna said, in order to make citizens participate in the most fragile areas of my city, I want to target that specific spots in my urban environment. So this is the map of fragility, and this is the map of action. So you can find a little bit of overlapping about the two. And this was their intention of working on the most fragile urban neighborhoods in Bologna. And how they worked. They worked with the laboratori di quartiere, as I said you before. You have some numbers in here. So they were activated 11 laboratori di quartiere. 170,000 citizens were involved. So, as you said, in a city like Bologna is not a very huge population, but at the same time is a starting point. And what they tried to do in order to make citizens participate in a different way was also translating the material, not only in English, but in the local languages spoken by different citizens in each and every neighborhood. So according to that neighborhood, according to the population that was there, all the information were translated. And also, people that were paid by the municipality were doing a door-to-door actions in order to make people know about the policy. And this is a kind of laboratorio di quartiere, just to be very practical. So they were a kind of round tables with citizens where they were trying to work together to co-design and design the reuse of empty buildings that were selected, and particularly that buildings were selected in the most fragile urban neighborhoods. So if you read the Piano di Innovazione Urbana, I think it's very nice to read. So if you want to download it, you can find in the website of the Bologna municipality. You can find each and every material there. So video that are trying to report about the process. You can find the flyers that they used, the different languages they use to make people participate. You can find everything there, so it's very nice to go on the website. Something that they try to do also, it's laboratorio spazi. So after laboratori di quartiere, they did a very specific policy on how to change the way these spaces were managed in the future. So as I told you before, in 2014, they activated the Regolamento dei Beni Comuni, but they realized that was not the only way and not the very good way in order to manage this kind of buildings that were underused public properties, maybe very big buildings. And so now they are trying to work on a different kind of regulations, also taking inspiration from another Italian case that is Naples, that I will show you after. This is Naples, okay, just in order to relax a little bit. I think this is one of the most interesting cases in Italy after Bologna, or maybe before Bologna, I'm not sure yet. I think this is the most peculiar case in Italy. Why? Naples approved something that is very different from the regulation of urban commons, because this regulation is called usi civici, civic uses. And so the municipality of Naples is recognized squatted spaces in the city, very different spaces. So this is the list of squatted buildings that were recognized by the public authority because they were giving services to the community. And in that way, they recognized the role that this kind of spaces had in the neighborhoods where they were working. And this is a very progressive and radical resolution according to the Italian context that was approved in 2012. And again, if you see other cities in Italy today, in Genova they are trying to work on a same specific regulation, and also Palermo was trying, and we're trying to work on usi civici again. So a policy that makes the local governments recognize squatting if the squatting is giving services to the community. And then we can debate about that, so about how to measure the impact, how to measure how a squatted space can be a service to the community, but they are trying to do that, and you can also have more information on it on the website. As Bologna, this is a kind of timeline of the policy, and just to be brief, what I would like to stress with you today is the role of a specific squatted space that is called l'asilo Filangieri. Someone knows l'asilo? Okay, l'asilo Filangieri is a cultural space that was squatted in 2012. The building was empty because the municipality of Naples wanted to, the municipality of Naples rehabilitate it, so using public funding, totally public, for the Forum of the Culture, which is a big event, a big cultural event that we have in Italy. And the squatters in Naples said, we cannot spend so much public money for a big event that is not driven by the community and the Napolitans, but it's a kind of, very big, high-class cultural event. So for that reason, they get together and they squatted l'asilo. In 2012, they entered, and what they decided to do is not just squat in the space, but they wanted to make the municipality learn about a new way, a new regulation to manage and govern squatting in the city. We have to remember that many squatters from l'asilo are lawyers, linked to Rodotà school, so dealing with urban commons. And so many of them said, we have an opportunity not to just be squatters, but we have an opportunity to write together a new kind of regulation, a new kind of local law that we hope the municipality can approve in order to make us recognizable in law. So not to be squatters, but to be squatters, but recognized. So they started to do that. And in 2014, their regulation was approved by the municipality, before was approved in the city council, then in the city board. So there was a political process that really accepted the work they did in the Lex Asilo. And after this recognition in 2014, other 2 spaces opened in Naples using the same regulation. And while the process was going on, other 3 spaces was opened. So now in Naples you have 8 squatted spaces. That you can find in here. Some of them are in the city, but some of them are in the metropolitan area. And some of them are working in very hyper-diverse neighborhoods, some of them not, obviously. As an example, l'Asilo Filangieri works in a diverse neighborhoods in the city center, lots of migrants, but also tourism. So it's a kind of small Raval, let's say. And what they're trying to do is working on the cultural production. Their mission is more, let's say, cultural and not social. But at the same time, the neighborhoods is asking them to do different kind of activities. So now they're active in migration rights. So they have lawyers that are working and some cooperatives they collaborate with in order to work on migrants' rights in the neighborhood. They are working also on shaping and designing a kind of help to precarious people that are young people that are living in the neighborhood that can be paid a little bit working in l'Asilo Filangieri. It's a kind of mutualism way of dealing with precariousness. So starting from the cultural mission, they are trying to work in a different kinds of initiatives. And this is the l'autogovierno dell'asilo. There's a big assembly that is meeting each and every Monday, each week. And this assembly takes all the decisions without voting, so by consensus. The decisions that are taken are how the space should be, how the activities should run, which kind of activities, instead of the cultural production, we should do for the neighborhood. So it's a kind of political assembly based on how the space should be. So how the space is, let's say they are revising the mission of the space. And then you have different tables, thematic tables, in the different kind of activities that the space have in ex l'Asilo Filangieri. So from Naples, we go to Toronto, so a very different context. But at the end of this brief presentation of cases, what I would like to do is trying to sum up some lessons learned from these cases. So just in order not to, just give you the overview and that's it. Toronto, it's obviously a very different context, but what I would like to stress for you today is that there's a specific process in this city that is making some neighborhoods become very, very poor, and some neighborhoods become very, very rich. So social spatial polarization in Toronto is very, very strong. And the neighborhood that I'm working in is the only affordable neighborhood that is remaining in the city center. So it's the only neighborhoods that nowadays you can afford a rent, a house there, even though you are like poor or middle class. In the other neighborhoods, it's very, very difficult today. Just to give you an example, my salary of Marie Curie, that is not bad. Obviously, it's not very big, but it's not bad. I cannot afford a house in the city center, because if you want a basement today, that is like a monolocale down, so without any window, you pay in Toronto around $2,000 per month. So all my salary, poof, goes in the rent, so I cannot do that. So now I'm sharing my house with other 3 workers. And this is a situation that is very, very common in Toronto now, because all the people are talking about housing crisis. Prices of housing is comparable to New York today, and the salaries are not. So the situation is very, very worrying. I hope something will change. And these are some data about Toronto. So another topic about diversity is the 33% of racialized people, and this is the concept they use, so black people, live in poverty. And this is very, very peculiar. You find social spatial segregation and also social spatial polarization. So you find specific neighborhoods where poverty is concentrated and a specific color is there. And so this is worrying again, and the situation is not very promising. This is the neighborhood I'm working in, is South Parkdale. So if you see the map of Toronto, is here, so in the south. Is in the city center, is the only neighborhoods where you can find a house a little bit less than $2,000 per month. And these are, so residents are 21,000, just the south of Parkdale. And as you can see, the 34% of the population is low income, so is poor. And at the same time, you have a lot of seniors and a lot of lone parent families. So it's a neighborhood where you have poverty and also fragility. So you don't have big families and very common families. You have a lot of lone families, and this is very specific. And the 90% of them are renters. So it means they don't own their property. And in the middle of the housing crisis, this is very strong, and this is a problem because the people cannot afford the rent each and every month. And what is happening in the neighborhood is very peculiar. So just in order to say a brief story to you, Parkdale was the first neighborhood to have a rent strike 3 months ago when I was there. So in a big building like this, there was just one owner, and the people inside couldn't pay the rent anymore because the rent was increasing at the end of the contract. The owner wanted to make it increase because the speculation is there. They couldn't afford, and so they decided to make a strike, a rent strike, and they organized themselves in the building, and they said, all of them are not paying the rent anymore. And they went in a fight, and after 1 month of negotiation with the owner, they succeeded in not having the rent increased. But this is the situation over there. So it's not a paradise, and this is the situation the citizens are fighting each and every day. So evictions, rent that is growing. It's a, diciamo, a very specific neighborhood in Toronto. In this context, you have a socially innovative initiative that is growing and growing, that is called Parkdale's People Economy. You can find the website. They have all the information, all the reports. They're very well organized, and you can find everything online. Everything started from this space at the end of the 80s, in the beginning of the 90s, so many, many years ago. Park was an organization that was working with homeless, drug dealers, drug addicted, and mental illness. So it was a cooperative that was working on social issues. But while the situation was changing, and because of the situation of the neighborhood, in 2000, Park decided to change a little bit its mission from the social services to something a little bit different, working in local development. So how we can activate the neighborhood, activate the citizens in order to make them more empowered, in order to fight this kind of new situation that is growing in the neighborhood. So speculation, democracy that is not there anymore. So public authority that was each and every year less respondent in the welfare system. And so they decided to change a little bit the mission, and they started to make alliances with other stakeholders in the neighborhood. And in 2015, with other stakeholders in the neighborhood, they started a planning study. And this planning study ended in 2016 with a document that it's a community planning document that is developing different strategies of development of the neighborhood, but in an inclusive way. So the mission of the Parkdale Community Planning Study was to say the neighborhood we are living in is poor, gentrification is coming, so we have speculation in the neighborhood. Democracy, local democracy is not there anymore as was before. We are not against development because our citizens deserve to work and have a salary and whatever, but at the same time, we cannot accept this kind of speculation and gentrification processes that is coming in the neighborhood. So we want to resist, but we want to develop towards the people that are living in here. So the motto of this organization is development without displacement. They mapped all the spaces in the neighborhood. They mapped also the new speculation projects that were coming. So the new buildings, high-rise buildings that are coming, paid by big investors. And what is important for this lecture is they are not describing themselves as socially innovative. They are describing themselves as a community organizer. So this is something that I'm dealing with with my research. In Europe, this kind of concept of social innovation is overwhelming. Each and every person that is activating in the neighborhood usually describe themselves as social innovator. While in Toronto, we have this specific tradition that is more linked to community organizing, that has a more political and progressive view, probably, in the action of community-based activation. In fact, this is the manifesto of Parkdale's people economy, so working in equity, inclusivity, diversity, and affordability. So these are the 4 elements they are working in, and you can see there's a kind of vision that is a little bit different of the other case study that I showed you. And they are trying to work in different areas of community action and policy. And one that is very, very important for them is participatory democracy. So again, they are saying that the local municipality has changed the way it's dealing with new developments in the neighborhood. There's no transparency, accountability, discussion, not the same that was many years ago. So they say we have to work more specifically on that topic. And this is something that is mostly important in a neighborhood like South Parkdale. So, as I said you before, 20,000 residents, but at the same time, 7,000 low-income residents, and 4,000 people on social assistance, and also more than 1,000 people that are waiting of households, of public households in the waiting list. And at the same time, you have lone parent families and senior living alone, so you have a kind of fragility that is very, very high. Again, how to make them participate, as Bologna showed us. In South Parkdale, there's a different kind of structure compared to Bologna that is very public-driven. In here, Parkdale's people economy is the one that is leading the process. So they are organizing one planning table each and every 2 months in order to make together all the stakeholders that are living and working in the neighborhood. They're doing outreach activities with community organizers that are paid by their organizations. They are hired by the organizations in order to do a community work. At the same time, they organize assemblies, thematic assemblies in the neighborhoods in order to discuss topics that are very important for them. Just to give you a brief example, when I was there, Vegandale wanted to open a new block of vegan culture in the neighborhood. It was an entire block dedicated to the vegan cuisine and culture. And the residents that cannot afford to pay something to eat, they didn't want a big company to come in the neighborhood. So they organized a big assembly in order to vote a document to negotiate with Vegandale some conditions and say, we don't want you in the neighborhood. We as residents, we want you to give us 5 conditions in order to be here. And so they were organizing this kind of assembly in order to resist to this kind of development and gentrification pressure. Toronto case studies compared to the other one that I showed you, and then I close. It's very peculiar because the municipality is invited to the planning table from the Parkdale people economy, but is not leading the process, is not there also as a managing authority. Let's say the privatization of community planning is there in a very structured and strong way, and this can be positive and negative at the same time, and this is something we should discuss today, also comparing to the other cases. And I can stop here. I have the slide with the lessons learned, but I think we can discuss starting from the cases that I showed you today, and also starting from the brief introduction I did on social innovation and urban regeneration. So I give you the floor if you want to make some questions, comments,